Hi, everybody. This is the first of what I hope to be many conversations we have on the issues and legislation facing our state and our county this year. I want to talk today about education. It's been a big topic in the campaigns that I and many of the people I know ran, and it's a big conversation that's happening in the legislature right now. And the impacts of these conversations will be widespread and felt across the state of Kansas. If you joined the county party on Saturday, we had this conversation with Chuck Koblenz, the superintendent of the Easton School District, Mark DeSetti from the KNEA, and Janet Wall, our representative to the State Board of Education. All three of those groups shared grave concerns about the future of education in Kansas, and they all came at it from very different perspectives. Now, during the campaign, you heard me talk a lot about the base state aid per pupil and the overall decrease in funding to K through 12 schools and higher education. Now, at that time, and even to this day, my opponent, the governor, and his allies in the legislature have said that they've never cut money from education, they're not going to cut money to education, and that schools, if they're having any problems, is because they're wasteful and they don't do things in the most efficient manner possible. Well, I can tell you from conversations I've had with superintendents across the county and with superintendents across the state that that's just not true. Administrations over the last 5 years have done everything possible to increase efficiency and to make real changes in their school districts so they can continue to offer the best programs possible without making massive cuts. But eventually, you just don't have the money to cut anymore. Education has already been attacked in this legislative session, even though we were promised that it wouldn't be. Just a few weeks ago, the governor announced an allotment plan to fill the $45 million shortfall in the January revenue income. What this plan did was cut millions of dollars from K through 12 and higher education. Now, what this basically did to the K through 12 education was take away the LOB outlay for this year's budget proposals. And that's a massive cut to give to a school district in the middle of the year. School districts are already working with low cash balances. This is the money that they tap into when state payments are late, as they often are, because they have things they have to pay that they can't just kick off. This includes utilities, teacher salaries, and the money that they need day to day to keep schools and districts running. Now, when you take away this money, they have to dip into their cash reserves even earlier. But many school districts are struggling with not having the cash reserves to fill all the gaps that the cuts to education are producing. Now, the governor said that he would not have to approve his allotment if the legislature could approve a different way to find the money elsewhere. But this is no better. The current proposal in the Senate, Senate Bill 71, would actually cut over $50 million from education and would have more disastrous impacts to the school districts. And this is just the start. What we have to remember is that the revenue shortfalls from month to month are not expected to get any better. There's not been a massive rush of businesses coming into the state or a new tax base that is developed between January and February. So we can easily expect $45 million shortfalls to continue through February, March, April, and into the foreseeable future until major changes occur. What that means is that the state will continue to have to find cuts, and those are mostly going to come from the education and the state transportation department. As we go into the next fiscal year, where the deficit is supposed to reach $600 million, we can only expect this to get worse. The governor has already shown that he's willing to make cuts to education, and the legislature is showing that it's willing to make those more drastic. As we continue through the legislative session, a careful eye will have to be lent to the future of schools in this state. School districts in Kansas are already having real conversations about how they will deal with the budget cuts that they're now expecting. USD 111 announced a week ago that it's going to have conversations about shutting down its elementary school as soon as this March. Their cash balances are too low, and they're expecting more cuts to their income from state budget shortfalls. A school district shutting down an elementary school is a massive move. It's not because they're inefficient, it's not because their administrations are too top-heavy. It's because the state has cut too much money for them to continue to survive and continue to be successful. Unfortunately, if we continue down the budget path that we are currently on, this will only become a common conversation across school districts. The governor's allotment and the proposal in Senate Bill 71 are intrinsically unfair to rural and poorer districts. And as they start looking at changing the way school funding is programmed, we run the risk of losing the equitability across school districts. Superintendent Chuck Koblenz gave a wonderful example of why we have our current school funding formula. Prior to the institution of the formula in the early 1990s, in any given county, the school districts could have very different mill levies. This is what we use to describe the property tax instituted against citizens in the school district to help pay the bills. For the richer school districts in a county, your mill levy could have been 13 to 20 mills. But as you got into the poorer school districts, maybe miles away from another school district, mill levies were as high as 120, 130, and 150 mills. When they created the new school funding formula, it provided a fairness across the board for all school districts because of the way that it was weighted. Now the mill levies across the state are fairly equal. But as we look at the new formulas they're talking about, we could lose this. It doesn't mean that schools are going to change the way that they get funding. What it means is that to make up the gaps that they're going to have, we're going to have to push that burden onto local property taxpayers. This hurts small businesses in rural communities and hurts Kansas in general, as property taxes have already increased in an attempt to offset the local impacts of the governor's budget shortfalls. As we continue to have this conversation, we'll need to pay careful attention to the weighting process that they want to put into the new general fund formula. If it gets too out of hand, it could cause serious problems to school districts, especially with their cash balances. Now, this isn't a fun conversation to have, but this is the real conversation being had across school boards across the state. It's not a pie in the sky type of situation. These are real impacts and real cuts that are going to be happening very soon. The hope would be that the governor and the legislature can finally have a grown-up conversation about the fact that this is a self-inflicted wound. The governor tries to blame everybody he can on the budget shortfalls and on the cuts to education. Students, teachers, parents, administrations, most recently a piano in Kansas City. But eventually he and his legislative allies will have to admit the truth, that this is a self-inflicted wound caused by their budget shortfalls in their 2012 tax plan. And instead of taking the credit for it, they're putting the burden down on the students and teachers of Kansas and the property owners across the state. This is unfair, and this is harmful for the future generations of Kansas. As we continue to fall behind the national trend in education, we only set ourselves up for more failure in the future, as our workforce is not prepared to change to the ever-changing economies of the 21st century. We often have a conversation about what brings people into Kansas and how we can get new businesses. What brings people into Kansas is a quality of life standard, knowing that their kids and their families are going to have access to the highest quality education possible. We once prided ourselves in our education, and I think most Kansans still do. But if we're going to continue to take pride in our education system, we have to find a way to solve this problem, the problem caused by the budget and the shortfalls from the 2012 tax plan. I hope we can have a real conversation about this, and I hope the legislature takes responsibility and finds a way to adequately support the school districts across Kansas. But until they have that conversation, pay attention to your school boards, talk to your superintendents, talk to your teachers and your students, and understand the conversations they have to have, the tough cuts that they have to make. I recommend talking to the people that are most impacted by this. We can read stories, we can understand numbers, but until you see the real impacts of this, it doesn't mean all that much. Education in Kansas is vital, it's important, and it's something we need to preserve. But if we continue down this path, there's very few options we have left open, and the damage done could take years to reverse. We're not talking about a few field trips being canceled, and we're not talking about parents having to pay more for books anymore. We're talking about extracurricular activities disappearing, first at the middle schools and then at high schools. We're talking about no football, no basketball, no debate, no forensics, no art classes, and no bands. We're talking about schools entirely shutting down, as some districts are already contemplating for as soon as this March. These are real conversations, real concerns, and real threats to education in Kansas. Until we have that grown-up conversation that we so desperately need to have, until the governor and the legislature opens its eyes to the real impacts that their budget game is having, I see very few ways that we can move forward, and the superintendents and school boards and administrations across the state are going to have to start making impossibly difficult decisions about how to move forward and how to best protect their students, their districts, and their faculty. I worked hard during the campaign to start a conversation about education. I hope that we continue to have this conversation on education. I hope that we continue to support education, and I hope we all remember the benefits and the good that public schools do in this state. We pride ourselves on public education in Kansas. It is what sets us apart from the pack and what sets us on top of the pedestal. But if we allow the governor and the legislature to continue to put it at risk, we only set ourselves up for future failure, and that's something that we just can't allow. If you're interested in staying up to date on these issues, go to our website, leavenworthcountydems.org. Follow our Facebook and our Twitter feed, read the newspaper, watch the news, and talk to your legislator. These issues are important, these issues are complicated, and these issues must be understood for us all to have a conversation on them. Thank you, and have a great day.